Hello, this is Terry with Fortres Grand Corporation, and today we're going to talk about Clean Slate 10, reliable non-restrictive desktop security. Today we'll take a look at the Clean Slate 10 features, how Clean Slate works, as well as how to get started with Clean Slate, where we'll actually look at the interface and take a look at some of the security options that are available inside of the Clean Slate. First, the Clean Slate 10 features. In Clean Slate 10, we've added support for Windows 10, and this includes online profiles and store apps. Microsoft made some changes to how store apps are installed and the way the store works, and so Clean Slate 10 supports that. We've also made improvements to how updates are handled inside of Clean Slate 10. This includes both Windows updates and, again, updates to those store applications. With Clean Slate 10, the main goal is to save time, and this is done by cleaning up changes that the user has made at either log off or reboot. You don't have to just reboot in order to have changes cleaned up. You can do that whenever you log off. Also, Windows updates are automatically allowed, so you don't have to do anything special for that. You don't have to configure any kind of downtime or time when the security is disabled. So Windows updates can be applied while a user is logged in, and the things that they are doing are going to be cleaned up, but the Windows updates will stay on the machine. Also, a great time-saving feature, especially for administrators, is that security is disabled by default for administrators. So if you were to go to the computer as an administrator and log in, by default, Clean Slate would not be enabled, so you don't have to do anything at all to start doing administrative tasks on the machine, maybe updating drivers or installing new software, because, again, Clean Slate will just disable itself automatically for administrators. Now, if you have administrators that you want to have security turned on for, you can do that inside of the interface, and we'll take a look at how to do that in just a few minutes. The configuration of Clean Slate is pretty straightforward. Again, you can do things like enable and disable security without rebooting. You can customize the security by user or computer, and you do that by placing users and computers into groups. And then you can also use our central control software, which is a separate program that you install on your server, to store settings on the network so that you configure once, and then all of the computers that are attached to that central control server will pick up those security settings without you having to go around to each individual computer and make the same configuration changes. The security in Clean Slate is very flexible. It allows you to configure folders where users can save and that information is not cleaned up when they logged off or restart the machine. You can also exempt applications like antivirus programs so that they can update their virus definitions without Clean Slate reverting that when the user logs off or restarts. And again, those things can happen while the rest of the security is still being applied to the user. So if an antivirus program is updating itself in the background while a user is downloading temporary internet files and surfing the internet, all of the things that the user has done will be cleaned up. But if you configure the antivirus programs to be exempt, they will be able to update themselves without being cleaned up. You can also accommodate system management software like SCCM, Altiris, or Landesk so that those agents can do whatever they want on the computer and you can use them to still manage your desktops without Clean Slate getting in the way and undoing the things that those management programs allow you to do. While Clean Slate is mostly non-restrictive security, there are a couple of built-in security features. You can do things like block unwanted programs from running. So you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can prevent the user from downloading new programs off the internet while they're in a session using the computer. You can also specifically block programs that are already installed on the computer. And you can also restrict users from bringing in a USB drive or running programs from the network and running them on the computer. So you do have that ability to restrict some of the programs that the user is able to run if you don't want them to just be able to run any program they find or they bring in with them. There are also some zero-day malware and master boot record protection built into Clean Slate, where we will block device drivers from being loaded if they weren't already on the computer as part of the main configuration. And also we prevent changes to the master boot record so that rootkits aren't easily installed and take over the computer. The installation for Clean Slate 10 is very convenient and flexible because it allows you to image the installation without having to do anything afterwards. So we have a system imaging support mode where you can install Clean Slate before you create your image and then deploy that image with Clean Slate already on it so you don't have to do anything after the image has been deployed. You can also script the installation to run silently with command line parameters. So if you have a bunch of computers that you want to install Clean Slate on and you aren't using imaging or you don't want to re-image the computers, you can push the installation out with the command line parameters through a script or a network management tool like SCCM or Altiris. Clean Slate 10 supports Windows 10, Windows 8.1, Windows 8, and Windows 7. And as with all of our software, we have toll-free technical support for as long as you have the software, and this doesn't require any maintenance. Clean Slate works by intercepting all of the file system and registry key access that happens on the computer. So in this diagram, you have applications that are on the left side, and they're modifying files and registry keys, and Clean Slate is getting in the middle of that, looking at your configuration and deciding what should be permanently allowed. Maybe it's an exempt application, or like antivirus, or it's the Windows Update, or if it's something the user's doing like temporary internet files or downloading games, that it should be put into the cache. And then that cache is what we throw away when the user logs off or the computer's restarted. This is a little more detail about what happens. You basically have an application that is going to open a file for writing, and what Clean Slate will do is if the file exists, it'll make a copy of the file and put it into our cache, and then give that cached document back to the application to work with. The nice part about the way this works is that the original document is never actually modified. It's only the copy in our cache that's modified by that application. And again, when the user logs off, we simply throw that cache away, which is quick and easy. We don't have to worry about putting anything back to the way it was because nothing was ever actually modified in the first place. If the file doesn't already exist, then we simply create the document in our cache and hand that back to the application, and that's what the application works with. So again, it's very easy. There's not a lot of overhead associated with the running of Clean Slate and doing a bunch of things when the user logs off in order to clean up. We simply throw that cache away. This diagram compares Clean Slate and traditional reboot to restore programs. On the right side, you have the path that applications take to modify files on the hard drive or also in the registry. And you can see that the reboot to restore products are typically between the file system and the hard drive, and they typically work with clusters of data, and there isn't a lot of context about what kind of data that is. Clean Slate, on the other hand, sits between the core of the operating system called the kernel and the file system. And the nice part about this is that Clean Slate has access to information about the name of the file that the user is trying to modify, the name of the program that's trying to modify the file or registry key, and who's logged in on the computer. So using that information, we're able to make intelligent decisions using your configuration and decide if this is something like a Windows update that should be allowed permanently, or it's a temporary internet file that should be thrown away. And so again, there's that benefit of having more context about what's actually happening than just having a bunch of bytes that need to be stored. To get started with Clean Slate, you can go to our website at fortresgrand.com and download a fully functional 30-day evaluation that you can install. The installation works on Windows 10, Windows 8.1, and Windows 8, as well as Windows 7. After you've run the installation, it will ask you to set a password. After you've set your password and restarted the computer, you can open the Fortres security interface to configure Clean Slate by using either the Control-Shift-F hotkey, where you hold down the Control and Shift key and hit F, or double-clicking on the tray icon. So what we'll do is go ahead and take a look at the actual interface now and see some of those security options that are available. So I'm going to do Control-Shift-F. And I put in my password. Now on this webinar computer, I have Fortres 101 and Clean Slate installed, and they both use the Fortres security interface. We're just going to focus on Clean Slate for this webinar. So the first thing I see is that I have different options for Clean Slate. I've got basic settings, allowed file and registry operations, and program execution restrictions. And we'll take a look at all these settings in a minute once we talk about how the groups work. Clean Slate works with groups, and the way you set it up by default is there is just a default group that is going to apply to all the users on the computer. If I wanted to change that, I can go to the Security Group Manager, and this is where I can create groups on the right side of this window and then assign users or computers to those groups so that when they log in, the security might be different based on the username or the computer name. In this case, we're just in local mode, so we're just going to see local users, but this works exactly the same way when you're connected to a central control server, and instead of seeing local users, you would see all of your Active Directory users. So I'm going to go ahead and just create a new group, and I'm just going to call it staff, and this is where we're going to put our staff users. I'm just going to expand the local computer, and what it's doing now is enumerating the local users on my PC, and I'm just going to grab admin and put him into the staff group. And now what will happen is whenever admin logs in, he'll receive the staff security. Any user other than admin will receive the default security. You can also assign computers to a group, so I could create a new group and call it webinar. And if I scroll down, I can drag and drop the computer in here, and now it doesn't matter who logs in on the webinar PC, this FGC webinar, they'll get the webinar group security, even if it is the admin. So the computer name is looked at first and has a higher priority than the username. If another user logs in on another computer, it would either be admin, which would get staff, or they would just get the default security from the default group. So again, you can put computers into groups and users into groups. Computers have a higher priority, so if a computer is assigned to a group, that means every user that logs into that computer will get the security that that computer is assigned to. If it's a username that's assigned, then that user security will be with them on those computers. So you just close the security group manager, and that will take you back. It saves automatically, so you don't have to worry about doing a file save or anything like that when you're working with the security group manager. Once I've got my group set up, I can just go to the group menu, and they're listed here, and so I can switch between staff and webinar. And you'll notice in the lower right corner it shows me the name of the group that I'm working with. It also shows me whether or not central control is active. So we're just going to go back to the default group and take a look at some of the settings that are in Clean Slate. Under the basic settings, we have Clean Slate security. This is either on or off, and this is just whether or not security is enabled for the group. In this case, security is enabled. If we wanted to change that, we could double click and select disabled and hit OK, and now security will be disabled. I'm going to go ahead and put that back to enabled. The next option is a Clean Slate security for administrators. This option allows you to turn security on for admins. By default, it's disabled, so that if I log in as an administrator, I don't have to worry about Clean Slate cleaning up things I do. We make that same assumption that Windows does, that I'm logged in as an administrator, so I must be doing something administrative on the computer. If that's not the case, and for whatever reason you have users that log in with administrative access and you want security turned on, you just double click and choose enabled, and security will be turned on for administrators. As I said, Clean Slate cleans up its cache whenever the users log out or restart. If you wanted to, you could set it up to only do that at restart and not at logoff. You can also set up an idle time monitor inside of Clean Slate so that it will automatically reset the computer after a specified number of minutes of idle time. So to do that, I would just say enabled, and maybe after 10 minutes of idle time, I could choose to restart, log off, or shut down the computer. This would be handy if you have users that typically just walk away from the computer and don't log off or restart it. There is a status icon that's associated with Clean Slate. If I go down to my tray, it's either a red up arrow or a green down arrow. So we can see that it's enabled, and there would be the green up arrow in the system tray, or again the red down arrow. There's also security at the initial login screen. That's kind of an advanced option, so I'm going to skip over that for now. If we move on to the allowed file and registry operations, this is where I would set up things that are going to be allowed to be written and permanently saved, areas where users can save. By default, when a user logs in, Clean Slate will clean up everything that the user does, assuming they're not an admin. So if I just download the 30-day demo off of our website, install it on a computer, log in as a generic user, do a bunch of things on the computer and log off, everything will be undone that I did while I was on the computer. This section of allowed file and registry operations is where I can make changes to that behavior and set up maybe a folder where the users could save, or programs that are exempt that the user may use. The first option is to keep the user profile structure, and what this option does is allow the operating system to create that part of the user's profile and have it permanently stay on the computer so that the user doesn't have to wait every time they log in for their profile to be recreated. If I were to disable this option, that would tell Clean Slate, clean up everything about the user's profile, and the net effect of that would be that if I log in as a generic user, I would have to sit and wait while my profile is created. I use the computer, and when I log off, if I log back in on that computer, I have to sit and wait again while my profile is created because Clean Slate will completely remove the user's profile. When this option is enabled, what will happen is when I log in on the computer for the first time, that portion of the profile that the operating system or Windows creates for the user will remain on the computer when they log out. Everything that the user does, like their temporary internet files or things they save to the desktop or my documents, will still be erased when they log off, but anything that's related to the core of that profile will remain, and the benefit of that is that if I log back in again, I don't have to sit and wait for my profile to be created. The question that typically comes up is, should I have this set to enabled or disabled? And the general rule of thumb that I use is that if you're in a K-12 kind of environment where you have users typically using the same computer on a daily basis, maybe in a lab for whatever, maybe for accounting or just a general purpose lab, if they're using the same computer on a daily basis, I would probably enable the keep user profile structure option so that they don't have to sit and wait every day for their profile to be created. If you're in a university environment where you have potentially thousands of different users using different computers all over campus, I would probably disable it so that you don't end up with 1,000 different profiles under the users folder. Ultimately, the option is up to you and how you want it to behave, but it really relates to whether the user has to sit and wait for their profile to be created every time they log in on the same computer over and over again. The next option is the writable folders and files, and this is where I can specify a folder that the user should be able to save to. So I could put in maybe c:\users Terry desktop, and now I'd be able to permanently save to c:\users Terry desktop. I should point out that NTFS permissions are still applied, so if I don't have access to save to the Terry desktop folder, maybe I'm not Terry, that is still going to be applied. This is only if the NTFS permissions allow me to save there. So if you wanted to have all of your users be able to save to the desktop, obviously you don't want to have to list every single user's desktop folder. One of the nice things with Clean Slate is that you can use environment variables. The most common one is %user profile %, and what that will tell Clean Slate to do, I hit escape there. If I put in %user profile %, it will tell Clean Slate when the user logs in, get their profile folder, and then make the desktop subfolder of that writable. This prevents me from having to list every single user's desktop folder. This environment variable will just be updated at runtime so that we know maybe it's Dan that logs in next. Dan's desktop will be writable, and then after that, if it's Mary, Mary's desktop will be writable. We don't have to list them all individually. I can also list files in here. So if I wanted to have test.txt be permanently writable, I can do that. And I can also use wildcards. So now any text file would be permanently writable. Probably not things that you want to do inside of Clean Slate, but you have that capability to allow access using wildcards, file names, or folders, and using environment variables. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you configure the software. The writable registry keys works very similar. You just click to add a new item, and then you can use the browse button, and this will let you browse to the registry. And if I wanted to make maybe the software macromedia folder writable for whatever reason, I could do that, press OK, and now that registry key and all of its subkeys would be permanently writable. The exempt applications is where I can tell Clean Slate to completely give full access to a specific EXE. This is normally used with antivirus programs, so I could just put in antivirus.exe. And now anything that antivirus does with either the file system or the registry will be permanent and not cleaned up when the user logs off. So this, again, is very handy, and you only want to use this for programs that you trust, like your antivirus program or other system utilities. There's also the option to have Clean Slate security applied to system threads and administrative threads. The system threads option, the only time that you typically disable this is if you're using something like Altiris or SCCM and you want to allow those agents to do things on the computer for you, and you're going to configure those things to run as system. In that case, you would go and disable the Clean Slate security applied to local system threads, and now anything running as a system thread would be able to do whatever it wants, and Clean Slate wouldn't get in the way. We'll skip over the file scanning applications. That's something that's not used very much. There are two restrictive options that are on the Allowed File and Registry Operations page. There's the Protect Master Boot Record and block loading of new device drivers. What block loading of new device drivers means is that any device driver that's in our cache, something that the user had downloaded, it wasn't on the computer when you set it up, that won't be allowed to load. That's a good way to transmit a virus, is by loading a device driver, because once you're loaded as a device driver, you can do anything you want. And so by default, we prevent device drivers that aren't already on the computer from being loaded. And then we also protect changes to the master boot record so that rootkits aren't going to be installed and nobody's going to take over that master boot record. Under the program execution restrictions, this is where you can restrict what programs the user can run. By default, these program execution restriction options are all disabled, so users can run any program that's already installed on the computer. They could download any program off of the internet and run it, and they could run anything from a USB drive or a network drive. So if you want to enable these restrictions, you would need to come here and actually configure it. The block new programs, when that's enabled, will prevent a user from downloading an exe from the internet and running it on the computer. So again, it basically knows that the program is in our cache and will not allow that program to run. The block start menu programs allows you to browse through a copy of the start menu and find EXEs that are in here. Maybe you don't want them to get into the immersive control panel. You can just put a check in the box and that will prevent them from being able to run that. If there's a program that's not in the start menu that you want to block, you can use the block other programs and insert maybe cmd.exe, which is in the start menu, but just for example purposes, you can put that in. You can also list the full path to cmd.exe. Like that as well, and narrow it down if you want to, but you don't have to. And the block programs on network shares and removal of media options do exactly what they sound like they would do. If you enable it, you can't run a program from a UNC share, and if you block programs from removable media, you can't put a thumb drive in and run a program from it. You can still save documents and open documents on the thumb drive, you're just not able to launch programs from the thumb drive. Now, the special applications is the next group, and basically this list of programs are typically antivirus programs or system utilities. There's things like Inoculated and McAfee and Altiris, Landesk, and Vexera. And essentially what happens with these options is that we will scan when the security loads and see if any of these programs are installed, and if they are, we will automatically put in any allowed file and registry settings that need to be there for that program to function properly. Again, these are mostly antivirus programs and system utilities that are going to be updating themselves. So if you have any of these installed and you want them to just work automatically, you won't even need to configure anything because they're in our special applications list. You can't modify this list yourself. This is something that's included with the program. But basically, the programs that are in this list, if they're installed on your computer, will configure it so that they can update themselves automatically without you having to go and manually enter any settings. The cache viewer and the diagnostics window are both kind of troubleshooting or debugging tools to see what is going on the computer. The cache viewer shows everything that we've put into our cache that's going to be cleaned up when the user logs off. And by default, it's only going to show things that are, again, going to be cleaned up. Registry keys, it will show all registry keys, but this is just an easy way to see what is going to be cleaned up or what's been put into that cache and going to be thrown away when the user logs off. The diagnostics can record a list of everything that Clean Slate has done with the file in the registry. It can generate quite a lot of information, so you have to actually go and turn the record on in order to have it record that information. The most common thing that people do with the diagnostics is go to the details report. The details report will generate a report that shows some basic system information, and that also shows all of your configuration settings as well as any diagnostic information. The handy thing in here is you can use the save option to save this as a rich text format file and then email that to technical support if you need any technical support. That way we can see your settings and know if there's anything that needs to be changed or anything that needs to be added. The last thing we'll talk about is system imaging support. And with system imaging support, this allows you to install Clean Slate right before you create your image and put it in system imaging support so that when you deploy that image out to computers, you don't have to reinstall Clean Slate after the fact. So the way this works is you put in the number of reboots that the computer is going to go through after the image has been deployed. Typically, there are things like sysprep that rename the computer or join it to the domain. Maybe it reboots then and downloads some packages off of a server and installs some components or some software. So if the computer is going to take 2 reboots in order to be ready for a user to log in, I would go ahead and put in 2 and press OK. When I press OK, it will disable Clean Slate, and it will tell Clean Slate for the next 2 reboots, put yourself in system imaging support mode where it doesn't hook into anything and won't interfere with any of those sysprep operations or configuring and downloading software. After the second reboot, then security will turn back on and it'll be running just like it normally is. So again, this option allows you to easily set up Clean Slate in an imaging system where you create the image with Clean Slate already installed and activated and just roll it out and have it in system imaging support mode so that it'll turn on automatically after the computer has been configured and is ready for the user to use. So that's a quick run through of the Clean Slate 10 features and kind of the options that are in there. Again, you can download a fully functional 30-day demo from our website and try it out and play around with the options. If you have any questions at all, definitely feel free to call our toll-free number and either option 1 for sales or option 2 for technical support. You can also email sales@Fortres Grand or support@Fortres Grand and get a hold of us that way. The third option is to do an online chat with us by going to our website, and in the upper right corner of the website there's a button that will connect you with a support representative so that you can have your questions answered that way as well. I appreciate your time today and hope you have a great afternoon. And again, please contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.